Well, if it's Tuesday, we're talking about the latest college football playoff rankings. Here's the third edition. Not a lot of change at the top. All undefeated teams, 1 through 4, Georgia, TCU, Ohio State, Michigan. Tennessee still in that number 5 spot, but LSU moving up 1 to 6, added USC, Bama, Clemson, and Utah, rounding out your top 10 there. We welcome in now our college football playoff rankings expert, Jerry Palm, and our senior writer, Dennis Dodd. Guys, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, and TCU still the top 4 in this latest rankings. Jerry, do you think the selection committee got this right with no change in with where these guys are seated?
Well, really, there wasn't anything to do with it. The game sort of indicated that this is what was going to happen. The only thing that they could possibly change is decide that the value of TCU's schedule is better than Michigan's and switch those two. But it doesn't really matter because Ohio State and Michigan are going to play next week anyway and sort all that out. So it doesn't really matter. This ranking is fine. It was pretty easy at the top of the rankings this week. It doesn't really get difficult for the committee this week until you have to start sorting out those 2-loss Pac-12 teams, of which there are 4 of them.
Yeah, whether TCU is 3 or 4 matters little at this point because they're going to have to win all their games or not. They still have a chance at, getting in at 12-1, but whether they're 3 or 4 this Tuesday night really doesn't matter. I guess you could quibble with the way they played and make a case for number 3, the way they played at Texas, allowing Texas just a field goal offensively, and then Texas ran back a turnover for a touchdown. Make TCU making a case, which I think it has, that it's a more dynamic team. It's a two-sided team, both offensively and defensively. But again, as Jerry said, this thing is going to be decided by itself because Michigan and Ohio State are going to play each other. That's going to resolve that in one way or another. And TCU is fighting its own demons in that it has to win out to assure itself a spot.
Well, Tennessee and LSU hang on to the next 2 spots. I was on the sideline there in Knoxville this weekend, and it was an impressive showing for the Vols against Mizzou. Dennis, do you think after this weekend, any of these teams should have moved up further? I saw your tweet that said Tennessee knows at least one of these top 4s is going to lose. It has a favorable schedule. Is it just wait and see for Tennessee?
Yeah, for LSU, it's the highest ranked 2-loss team. That's exactly where they should be right now, and they've earned that spot. They control their own destiny. We talked about it last week. If they win the rest of their games, they'll be in the playoff. Yes, they will have to play Georgia, but that's going to be tough, but they hold it in their hands. I happen to think that right now the 2 teams that are in the best position are Georgia and Tennessee, because Georgia could theoretically suffer a loss somewhere along the line and still be in the top 4. It's going to be hard to drop them out. Tennessee doesn't have to play in a conference championship game. It's just sitting there waiting for the chaos above it or below it to filter out, and it will get in or it won't based on what happens above and below. So they've made their statement, assuming they beat South Carolina and Vanderbilt. But I think the drama and the road is actually less for them than some of these other teams.
Yeah, well, for Tennessee, it's really important that Georgia finishes undefeated, because if LSU beats Georgia and wins the SEC, now all of a sudden Tennessee is the 3rd-ranked SEC team, and there just isn't going to be room for 3 SEC teams in the playoff. So they're going to be out. The best chance for Tennessee is for Georgia to be undefeated, for a little bit of chaos among some of these other conferences like the Big 12 and the Pac-12 and the ACC. And if they get enough chaos there, 11-1 Tennessee has a chance to get in. Tennessee is susceptible to being jumped by a 12-1 conference champion. It's not guaranteed that would happen, and Tennessee has a strong resume. But there's no safety in being right behind the top 4 with 2 of those teams still yet to play each other.
Alabama and Clemson, they're heading into Week 12 coming off wins. Bama now, though, has 2 losses. Clemson just 1 as we approach the end of the regular season here. Jerry, what do you think of the chances either or both make it into the CFP?
Alabama's got no chance. The best they can do is finish 10-2. There's going to be at least 2, maybe 3 SEC teams ahead of them in the rankings, not to mention the Ohio State-Michigan winner and probably the Ohio State-Michigan loser. There's no path to 4 for Alabama, and there hasn't been for a couple of weeks. Now, Clemson still has a chance because they can finish 12-1 and a conference champion. They have a chance to still move up. I think they're going to need some help because I think they'd be considered the weakest of the conference champions because the ACC has not been overly good this year. but still, Clemson at least has something of a path. Alabama's got nothing.
Yeah, and you're right. Alabama's been out of it for a couple of weeks. I don't even know if they'll have being a New Year's Six bowl if they lose again. But the Clemson thing is interesting. They've got to hope for two of the top four to lose, namely Michigan and TCU, to create an argument there. And then for UCLA to beat USC. That way, no matter who wins the Pac-12, they've all got two losses at that point. I know Oregon only has one conference loss, but they're ranked lower. That's going to be tough. So, and Oregon has two losses overall, so that's going to be tough. So that would put Clemson in the discussion, but that's all it would do. As Jerry mentioned, I think their schedule makes them a little bit susceptible to even a Tennessee, as I've said from the beginning of this, even a Tennessee at 11-1. I know the committee favors conference champions, but as I said, those first couple of weeks, even now, Clemson still doesn't look like one of the top four teams. It just doesn't look like a playoff team. Tennessee looks like a playoff team. Frankly, LSU looks like a playoff team. Clemson doesn't.
Well, prediction time here, Dennis. Dennis, get us rolling. What does your next CFP rankings look like?
My next CFP rankings, well, I think it's going to stay about the same. I think, obviously, Georgia is going to win. Michigan and Ohio State have basic walkovers to get to their game on November 26th. And then TCU, now that's the toughest one. TCU has a rivalry game at Baylor, and I know they just got boat raced by Kansas State at home, but that is a rivalry game. This stretches back to 2014, the first year of the CFP, when they tied for the conference lead. People don't realize this. The Big 12 didn't have a conference championship game then, and it was because they didn't have that championship game that the Big 12 got left out of that first CFP. So this is going to be very interesting with TCU. I do think they'll win at Baylor, though. Baylor looks like a diminished team. So those four in kind of the same order. If we're just talking about next week.
Well, for me, for the final rankings, I still have the same four I've had now for a few weeks, and that is Georgia, Ohio State, TCU, and now an undefeated TCU, because I had projected them at 12-1 with a loss to Texas. Now undefeated TCU, and Tennessee sliding in fourth. They're going to need a little help, as we've talked about, to get there. But I think that can happen, and that Tennessee ends up in the fourth spot, and we get another Georgia-Tennessee game as a playoff semifinal.
All right, that's our Jerry Palm and Dennis Dodd breaking on the latest college football playoff rankings. Thank you, guys. Now taking a look at who has the best odds to make the CFP. Well, as you see it here, Georgia still the overwhelming favorite, minus 4,000. That's closely followed, relatively speaking, there by Ohio State. They're second. Tennessee following behind Ohio State.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.